Hey guys, this is Carrie, and in this video we're going to be talking about errors and debugging. So you might think you make errors because you're a bad programmer, but that's not the case. You make errors because making errors is part of being a programmer. So don't be worried when you make errors, but it is an important skill to develop to be able to catch your own errors instead of relying on somebody else to fix them, because ultimately that will lead to your success in coding. So the first kind of error that we're going to look at is an error called a programmatic error. And so a programmatic error can be broken down further into syntax and semantic errors, but you don't have to know the distinction between those right now. A programmatic error is one that comes from a mistake that you've made in the programming language itself. It's not a logical mistake. You have the right logic, but the way you typed it in, it doesn't actually work in the programming language. So if you look at this code here, we've got some JavaScript here, and all the errors are going to be in the JavaScript this time. So the first error that you might catch immediately, just on looking through the code, is a programmatic error. You might notice that all of our lines of code should have a semicolon. And that's a programmatic error because we expect in JavaScript that every line of code will end with a semicolon. The other errors might be a little hard to catch. So I want to show you some tools that you can use to catch hard to catch errors. So the first tool is give it a save and give it a run. And you can tell there's an error immediately because it doesn't actually run. This is called testing your code. And it's actually a way that you can find a lot of errors and even find out that you have an error. So we find out that we have an error. So method number two, in addition to testing our code, you can actually look at something called the JavaScript Console. So if you click View, Developer, and not View Source this time, not Inspect Elements this time, but JavaScript Console, it will pop up something called the JavaScript Console. And you can move this around using these options by clicking here. I like to have it on the bottom of my screen so that I can read my web page pretty clearly. And it will actually pop up an error here. So we got a big error right away, uncaught syntax error, unexpected string. And we'll actually tell you what line of code that error is appearing in. So it says it's from the video1.html file. That's the file I have open right here. And it's on line 18. So if we go to line 18, there is an error in this line of code. And we haven't talked about this word string yet, but it's actually a really helpful word to know. A string is a group of characters, a string of characters, all inside of quotes. So what this means to me is that somewhere, one of these two strings, one of these two groups of quotes actually has an error in it, and it should not be a string. And perhaps that's enough of a prompt for us to realize that, hey, hobby was supposed to be a code word here. We're not trying to say the word hobby equals the word rock climbing. We're trying to say the code word hobby stands for rock climbing. So let's give that a save. And let's give that a refresh over here, and you can actually leave the console open. And we have another problem. And this time it says uncaught syntax error. Identifier hobby has already been declared, and that's in line 19. And this is one of the reasons why having that vocabulary that we've been building is so important, because you might not have actually been able to decode what this message is saying, but if you see the keyword declared, you might think, okay, when we declare a variable that says I'm creating a new variable, and it's going to be called hobby. But in this case, if you look at line 19, we're not creating a new variable named hobby. We're changing what's stored in hobby, but we shouldn't be recreating it because we've already created it once. So when we make this line of code, line number 19 from the error message, we don't need to recreate it. We just need to say, okay, we have hobby already, and hobby should equal hiking. And so we're changing the value, but it doesn't need to be redeclared. So we get rid of the let word. So next up, we refresh it, and we've got the third test, right? We've tested it a number of times. It has another error. And this one, it says reference error, hiking is not defined, and that's in line 21. So if you go to line 21, something is up with this word hiking. And it's saying it's not defined. So it doesn't actually know what this word hiking means. And it's not an issue with the computer not knowing what hiking is. The computer doesn't know what hiking is, but that's not a problem. The computer doesn't know what this code word is. And the reason why is we don't want to use the code word hiking. We wanted to use the code word hobby because that's the word that we gave meaning to. So we have to change that to hobby. And now when we test our code one more time, it should alert the most recent value of hobby, which was hiking. And that looks correct. So we've successfully debugged 3 programmatic errors, and they were programmatic errors because they were problems in our implementation of the programming language, not problems with our own logic. These are the easier kinds of errors to catch because they come up in the console. In video 2, we're going to look at the hard to catch errors. So let's load up video 2. So in video 2 here, I'm just going to cancel through it, and we can take a look at it now. I guess I should change the name of this to errors elsewhere 2 and errors elsewhere 2. That's a logical error because this is number 2, problem 2. This is not problem 1. And the reason why this counts as a logical error instead of a programming error is it's a problem with my logic. I could have been clearer here. It wasn't that the code didn't load. The code loads fine. It just doesn't work the way I expect. So it's a problem in my logic. But these errors are particularly dangerous when they're in the JavaScript of the file, not in the HTML. So let's see some logical errors in the JavaScript. Oops, sorry, logical error in my brain. Logical error in the JavaScript, save it, refresh it. It says, what is my favorite hobby? Okay, I will go with rock climbing, all lowercase, rock climbing. What is your second favorite hobby? I'll go with hiking. And my favorite hobbies are rock climbing and hobby 2. And that's a pretty rough sentence. There's a lot wrong with this. So if you look at this, the first thing you might catch is my favorite hobbies. Well, hobbies is misspelled. That seems like a logical error. The code ran fine. It just doesn't make logical sense. Then it says, my favorite hobbies are rock climbing. Our rock is not really a word, so it looks like we're missing a space there. So you have to think, okay, my favorite hobbies are space plus rock climbing. And that's a logical error. Nothing's wrong with the code. It comes out fine, but it doesn't actually work the way we expect it to work. So my favorite hobbies are rock climbing plus climbing and hobby 2. Okay, so we've got a problem here. So it should be end with spaces so that there's spaces here and here. Logical error because it runs fine, just doesn't look right. And then hobby 2 actually shouldn't be the word hobby 2. It looks like hobby 2 should be the code word hobby 2 because it should have said hiking. So we want the code word hobby 2 instead of the string, the quote hobby 2. So let's give this a save. And one thing that's important is whenever you test your code, you got to retest it sometimes with the same values, sometimes with different. So let's retest it with the same values. My favorite hobby is rock climbing. What is your second favorite hobby? Hiking. My favorite hobbies are rock climbing and hiking. It looks good. And you might think that we're all set, no more errors, life is good. But you should always test it with multiple values. So let's test it with 2 other values. What is your favorite hobby? Dancing. What is your second favorite hobby? Singing. My favorite hobbies are rock climbing and singing. So we see that there's actually a problem with rock climbing. Even though I didn't type rock climbing that time, I typed dancing and singing. Rock climbing is coming up. So we've got another logical error. So we look down at our code, and maybe it's not obvious to us where that error is. So we bring up the JavaScript console. Oops, sorry, this isn't how I taught you to bring up the JavaScript console. You go to View, Developer, JavaScript console. And let's run the code. So favorite hobby was dancing. Second favorite hobby was singing. My favorite hobbies are rock climbing and singing. And this is what's dangerous about logical errors is there's no problem with the code. It runs fine. It doesn't do what we want it to do, but it doesn't pop up any messages because we don't have an error in the programming language. So we actually have to catch this error on our own. So we go and we look at this script and, okay, so dancing is hobby 1. And then I look down at the alert and I see there's actually no place where hobby 1 is being used. Instead, it looks like we've hard-coded in rock climbing to always be that answer, and it shouldn't be rock climbing, it should be hobby 1. So let's give that a save and a refresh. So again, notice that we test it each time. Dancing, singing. My favorite hobbies are dancing and singing. Awesome. Trying it again. What is your favorite hobby? Playing video games. What is your second favorite hobby? Sleeping. My favorite hobbies are playing video games and sleeping. And it works again. So we've tested our code, we've debugged all the logical errors, and I think we're ready to start coding some more on our own. I hope this was helpful, guys, and we'll see you in class.